In the movie Back to the Future Part 3, there is a scene near the end where the generally enthusiastic and optimistic Doc Brown has given up. He is in the saloon in 1885, and he's about to take a shot of whiskey and doing what he has forbidden Marty McFly from doing for all of 3 movies, telling people about the future. He informs some of the other bar patrons about a time where people will no longer be using horse-drawn carriages or wagons because everyone will be driving around in automobiles. One of the patrons asks incredulously, "If everybody has one of these auto whatsits, does anybody walk or run anymore?" To which Doc Brown responds, "Of course we run, but for recreation, for fun." This gets cackles of laughter from the rest of the bar patrons, and one of them asks, "Run for fun? What kind of fun is that?" Of course, we find it funny because we know that everything Doc Brown has been talking about will come true. So we look at those patrons mocking him as though they are the bunch of rubes that will get their comeuppance. But really think about it for just a moment. Auto ownership didn't hit 50% of the United States until the 1940s. High-speed travel was a pipe dream until the interstate highways started construction in the 1950s, a mere 70 years ago. In fact, there are people in this room who, if you told them when they were little that you could drive from Oklahoma to anywhere in the continental United States in under a day, they would have probably looked at you like you were talking about teleportation. For example, just last weekend, we went to Amarillo for a hockey tournament. Took us around 4.5 hours to get there, mostly because of multiple bathroom stops to accommodate a certain 4-year-old. Just 100 years ago, that trip would probably be accomplished by horse, unless we were lucky enough to afford a train ticket. Horses can make about 25 to 35 miles per day. So if we left at the same time a week ago Friday, we would be getting there right about now, give or take a day. You can make the same analogy about so many of our current technologies. Imagine trying to explain to the Wright brothers how the space shuttle works. Never mind the naysayers of their day or any of the humans for the thousands of years before them that knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that manned flight was nothing but a pipe dream belonging only in the realms of science fiction and mythology. If you still think I'm overreacting to a movie scene, what if I told you today that somewhere in the future we will be teleporting around like they do on Star Trek? You'd probably call me crazy. You'd probably ask me if people walk or run with all those tele-whatsits. Well, maybe not in our time, and maybe it will never happen. But are you aware that they have successfully teleported particles up to 1,200 kilometers? Don't rule it out. I say all of this because too often we wander around in our own world with this amazingly sharp belief that everything that there is to be found has already been found, and everything that there is to know is already known. That belief is so sharp that it threatens to cut us from our faith. We write off stories like that of Abrams to any one of a number of terms that we like to think of and are comfortable with. And too often, miracle is not one of those terms. It's just too unbelievable. Imagine for a moment being in Abram's shoes. You have longed to have a child that you can leave your legacy to. You and your wife have tried so hard to make it a reality to no avail. You have finally reached the point where you have given up. You are settled, or at least resigned, to your fate. So much so that you have agreed to try and solve the problem on your own through the creation of Ishmael. Then out of nowhere, God appears and says that he's going to give Sarah and you a son, and that your descendants are going to be more numerous than the stars in the sky. How would you respond? Now, if we read on a little bit further in Genesis, we discover in the next verse, in 17, that it reads, Abraham fell face down, he laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? He laughed at God the same way those bar patrons laughed at Doc Brown. I know I would probably struggle in the same way. But if God's promise to Abraham was unbelievable, the message that Jesus was delivering the disciples must have been even harder to take on. Jesus, the Messiah, the one who was going to once again free the Jews from oppression, was going to die? And not only was he going to die, but then he was going to rise from the dead. It's no wonder that Peter pulls him aside and rebukes him. It must have been truly unbelievable to even consider that the one who would save us would die. The reasoning why God does what he does confounds us even to this day, 2,000 years later, doesn't it? And it all leads me to think of one of my least favorite but accurate cliches. You don't know what you don't know. Can't tell you the chills that would go up my spine whenever somebody would use that or some variation of it at work. And I'm certain that some of you have heard that and had a similar repulsion. However, sayings don't become cliche unless there's at least some truth. And what we don't know about God, well, it's still unknown. We don't know what we don't know about God, the same as Abraham and Peter did not know what they didn't know about God. Abraham didn't know that God could give him a son, and Peter did not know that God could die and rise again. And that's why we turn to Paul. Now, while Paul probably doesn't know much more about God than any of us or Abraham or Peter did, he better understands one of the most important pieces of the covenant between God and humans, and that is faith. As long as I'm using cliche to make my point today, I'm also going to use a trope. I'll just pull out all of the overused speaking tools. The trope is defining words, in this case, faith. I do this because I believe that we have a habit of overusing words to the point where we forget what they truly, actually mean. And it takes away their power. And the only way to give that power back is to actually define the word. So what is the definition of faith? Oxford gives it 2. Number 1, the complete trust or confidence in someone or something. The second option, a strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. Apprehension in this case meaning understanding. So it is a spiritual understanding. Our options, a complete trust or a strong belief in God based off of spiritual understanding. Now, using those definitions, I think Paul might be giving Abraham a little bit too much credit if we're talking about a complete trust. After all, we certainly know that Abraham did laugh at the concept of becoming a father at his advanced age. But I believe Paul is 100% correct in giving credit to Abraham using that second definition. Because yes, Abraham laughed at God, but he followed through. He fulfilled his side of the agreement as though there was never the slightest doubt in his mind. After all, that second part of the definition says strong belief, not absolutely certain belief. What if Paul is telling us through the story of Abraham that our belief need only be strong, not absolute? Strong enough for us to act and complete what we are called to do, but with enough room for us to keep looking, to keep asking questions, and to be ready to listen when God tells us something unsuspected, something unbelievable. Something like what he told the disciples when he told them that in order to free them, he must die. That is an unbelievable statement to make. In order to free you, I must die. Almost as unbelievable as not only will I die, but I will also come back to life. And there really are only two natural reactions to somebody telling you that. Option one, you're insane. Option two, quit acting so crazy. That cannot be true. Tell me what you really mean. Peter was reacting the second way. Now add to that unbelievable statement the following. If you merely believe that I will set you free through my death, I will make you live forever. Certainly nobody will blame you if you have doubt from time to time, if you seek more answers, and if you struggle when things don't go your way. I know that at many points in my life, I have felt one or all three of those at the same time. We often look at Paul, and he gets a bad reputation as the guy telling us that we have to be perfect. We can't get married. We must torture ourselves so we understand what Jesus went through. However, every time I read Paul, I realize more and more that he is really much more understanding than what we give him credit for. When we look at this passage the first time, we probably read that we must have the faith of Abraham to be saved, a guy who moved when he was 100 years old because God told him he'd have a son, a guy who was later ready to sacrifice that son. We see those in panic saying to ourselves, I can't live up to that. We see Abraham with that first definition, an absolute certainty. But I challenge you to see it a little bit differently. See it in the light of an Abraham who laughs at God's promise, as though God was telling some bar patrons in the late 1800s about automobiles. See the faith of Peter, shuddering at the thought of Jesus' death, to the point where he rebukes him, the one he considers the Messiah. See it with that second definition, a strong belief. A strong belief is open to new ideas and doesn't see things as impossible. A strong belief is open to change, open to growth, and open to God walking through those doors in an image that we have yet to imagine. Let me take a moment and remind you of Proverbs 25:2. It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings to search it out. A strong belief will keep you searching for God. You have to, because there is no certainty in what you believe, so you have to keep going back to Scripture. You have to keep going back to your congregation. You have to keep expanding your knowledge of God and His world. A strong belief will not be shattered. It won't give up like many of the Pharisees of Jesus' day when they were told something that went against their absolutely certain belief. When you have a strong belief, there is nothing that is unbelievable. Not even that God would sacrifice His Son in our place as a demonstration of His overwhelming love and mercy. A strong belief is open to being told to do something impossible, like loving your neighbor, loving sinners, and loving your enemies. A strong belief puts God in front and leaves absolute certainty behind, because absolute certainty in anything of this world is merely absolute ignorance of God's possibilities. A strong belief, like it did for Abraham, Peter, and Paul, will keep you moving forward in your call, even when it seems unbelievable that God has called you. Because that is one thing that I don't find unbelievable. God has called you. God has called all of us. and all we need is faith to keep us going. Amen.